My understanding of the world since 2020 has been that China is rushing towards war, and Russia and Iran are part of that, right? And the American government at the deep state level, and I'm not talking about deep state in a conspiracy way, I'm talking about the US military and intelligence apparatus, which, as you and I agree, underwrites the American empire.
Yeah.
It is a very, in some ways, I think the most powerful entity in the world. And it, let's just call it, recognizes that China was prepared to go by 2027.
Sam Cooper, my brother, it's so good to see you, man. Every time we don't talk for like a month, I always feel like out of the loop. You know, everything explodes and then we come back together. It's like we're the force that secretly holds the universe together.
Yeah, another night session, and I'm, I'm doing a lot of stories each day, so it kind of works out for me. Like
Dude,
pack another talking at night here.
well, the Bureau has always been a main source of information for me, but it has been even more so now because the difficult thing with everything that's happening in the world is that it's hard to find an unbiased perspective. You know, it's hard to find journalists who are just reporting what's happening and not injecting their own point of view into everything, right? And of course, right now, I think a lot of people are very emotional about some of the things that are happening in the world. You have pro-Israel journalists. You have, I wouldn't call them anti-Israel, but, maybe questioning Israel's motives journalists. And so the point is that everything is steeped in conjecture, whereas the Bureau has become a source of just raw, straightforward, this is what happened facts. You're a journalist, Sam. Who would have thought?
Or yeah, raw military intelligence, but the type that only tells it like it is, not without the political spin. It's like, yeah, I'm seeing the conflict. I'll be very, straight up. I tell people, I in 2023 when I launched the Bureau, I took a trip to Taiwan, and it was at the invitation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So full disclosure, they paid for my trip there. I wasn't, told to write anything. I went there very willingly because as I've told you, I thought this was the North Star of the conflict that's going to happen in the world. And like I've been writing in the Bureau this week, we're going to talk about what's going on in Iran, but the world now knows that the former CIA director, William Burns, briefed Tim Cook and like Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, a bunch of tech CEOs in 2023 under the Biden administration. We now know from the New York Times a couple weeks ago with a good kind of late investigative story saying the CIA told these bosses of, global tech giants that China was preparing to attack in 2027 by 2027 in Taiwan. So the people that essentially power the world, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're on, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republic, the people that know how the world's turning knew and know this is the conflict that has been driving everything. As you and I have said, the race for the US government to prepare for this potential invasion of Taiwan, which they won't let occur. And I've known that for a while. So yeah, I'm not politically driven. When my whole career is assessing what's real, what's true, avoiding partisan spin. I like to be right to a fault, right? I like to get good information and tell people, yeah, if I can predict the future with some accuracy, that's good for me. It's good for you, right?
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, I think the state of where we are culturally is that express, if you express anything other than appreciation for the ruling party, then you yourself are on the other team or on the other side. And it's like, no, I can not like what this government is doing, but also not be, a cheerleader for the opposition. right? Like I can voice criticism at what my government is doing or governments around the world and not be pro whatever other team. But that's kind of the problem that we face culturally, is that we're divided into teams, and I refer to them as dueling religious cults, is what they've developed into now, where it's like, it's like with myself as a writer and as a podcaster, all the time I get angry conservatives emailing me or sending me DMs because I'll say something that is critical of Trump or Polyev or whoever on the conservative side, and they're like, oh, I thought you were a real conservative. I'm like, I'm not. I've never been.
Yeah.
I've always just been down the middle. Like that's
Yeah.
the way I was trained to view things. Right now, I was never a journalist. I've always been an opinion writer. But even then, that's the way you're trained, is to take an unbiased approach, look at things honestly, and push it through your lens with an honest perspective. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the best way to be, in my view.
So let's get right into this crazy world of ours, Sam. Of course, as everybody knows, the United States has gone in. Would you call them surgical strikes in Iran? They deposed Khamenei, which Iranians all over the world celebrated. I think most people have seen those videos online, no matter where it was, whether it was London or Toronto or New York or Los Angeles. Iranians were in the streets celebrating. And then, of course, as the Islamic Republic keeps trying to appoint new leaders, the United States goes back in and takes that guy out. So, Sam, based on your analysis, and you've done a ton for the Bureau, what is happening right now in Iran, in your view, and based on the information that you've read?
Yeah, I think it's the next step after Venezuela. They're demonstrating, as they did in Venezuela, that no one in the world can fight multi-domain warfare like the United States can. It doesn't matter if China has a military approaching in size, and China has greater industrial capacity now, which is the real concern. The US government, I would say there's a lot of debate now. Is this war about regime change? Is it about taking out nuclear capacity, taking out long-range missiles? Is Israel driving it? Blah, blah, blah. So there's so many viewpoints. You have to kind of filter down. And I'm trying to look and see if I've been wrong at all in my talks with you for the past couple of years. And I say, no, deep down, yeah, of course, Iran is very dangerous. Of course, Iran tried to take out Donald Trump. Of course, Iran is trying to kill people on Canadian soil, as I say. They're destabilizing the Middle East, but they are part of the CRINC, or, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea alliance, or as I would say, the anti-NATO. You could call it the axis of evil if you really want to say what I believe.
Yeah.
The anti-West alliance. And so Iran is crucial for China's position and plan to displace the United States as the global hegemon. So we've talked about how you said you thought Venezuela and Maduro was more about oil probably than drugs. And I said, I think counter narcotics is a big deal, but absolutely oil, it's almost the same here. Underneath the surface, oil going from Venezuela, to mixing around with Iran and Russia and getting over to China, was a big part of it. Venezuela's threat in the Western Hemisphere, was a big part of it. And same thing with Iran, I believe. So, yeah, they have now demonstrated for 5 days, again, at 1,000 or 10,000 times, the volume and demonstration of their power in flying in, a couple, however far Caracas is inland, being able to snatch Maduro out in like in an hour, without any back, without taking any damage. They're demonstrating the same power in Iran right now, and people. I think it's already won. There's no losing for that in a military way. The only question now is, what government comes next, or is it kind of a destabilized state? So that's the big question in my mind. But as I say, yeah, I do think at the end of the day, at a deep strategic level, this is about China.
It has to be. I mean, look, and the thing is what I want to point out to people out there listening is that this isn't a regime change war in the same way that, say, like Afghanistan or Iraq were. Iran is a very different animal. Iran was funding Hamas, Hezbollah. Iran was behind the October 7th attacks in Israel. They have been a huge proponent for terrorism around the world. They were, for Canadians, there were 100 Canadians who were shot down in a flight that was shot down by Iran. So they're not in the they don't exist in the same way that, say, Iraq or Afghanistan did, where they were contained. They are actively mobilized and pursuing their enemies around the world. Now, Sam, something I've pointed out a number of times in my writing over the last few weeks is that the IRGC is active in Canada. Now, with everything that's happening in Iran between the United States and the Islamic Republic, or what's left of it at least, what danger does the IRGC cells in Canada pose to both Canadians and Americans across the border?
Yeah, this is a huge threat issue, and not just my opinion. I'm basing that on David Luna, a colleague, a former U.S. intelligence official, has come out with that opinion, which I wrote into, a Bureau story. Others in Canada that I know of, and we've already seen it in Canada. Let me phrase it this way. I already talked to, my good colleague, Gary Clement, in a podcast today for the Bureau. And we were talking about how can someone like a Ryan Wedding rise to become, a globally significant narco in Canada? And the answer is Iranian state-adjacent underground banking is huge in Vancouver and Toronto. They work with people like Ryan Wedding, who are sort of next-generation biker types who have become Sinaloa cartel bosses by working together with Iranian underground bankers and state-adjacent Iranian guard-type figures to move money around the world with Hezbollah. And work with the CCP, obviously. But back to Iran, there, as Gary and I were talking about, huge money laundering in the North Toronto area, which Gary investigated, personally, which I have written about a lot. And this is the exact same area where the night, I believe, after Khamenei was killed, one of the Iranian dissident community leaders, a boxer, had his gym shot up. And this is after he helped organize, that rally in Toronto of hundreds of thousands of people with, the Persian lion flags. Another, a Jewish synagogue got shot up the day after, which would appear, I think, quite plausible that these are proxies for the Iranian regime, taking retaliatory measures in Canada, which, as we know, isn't even, we don't know if Canada is for or against this operation from the U.S. government targeting Iran. But I would just like to add another huge story. There's an Iranian-Canadian mathematician out in Burnaby, British Columbia, who the community in Canada knows was very vocal about seeking regime change for years. And there's a murder investigation. It appears that, British Columbia homicide investigators believe that it could be politically motivated, the reason that this man has disappeared a couple of weeks ago. And it's a huge issue in the Iranian diaspora. So that happened, in the buildup to the Israeli-American attack, while people like this were sort of banging the drum that they wanted to see regime change in Iran. So a huge issue, and we've already seen, down in the States, it looks like a similar potential type attack. And as I said, my colleague David Luna said, regardless of U.S. military success in Iran, there's a huge concern with sleeper cells in North America and beyond. And what are they made of? They're made of, it could be Hells Angels, it could be Sinaloa cartel operatives, it could be Russian organized crime, working and tasked by Iranian intelligence that's still active in Iran, working with the Iranian guards. They know they're getting beat, and so they may activate those kind of let's call them, hybrid attacks in North America.
That's a fascinating angle and something I haven't really considered, Sam. But this synchronization of organized crime with terrorist organizations. Sam, let's go a little bit deeper into that. Like, do we have a lot of, I mean, obviously we do on the drug front and on the money laundering front, but in terms of organized hits, assassinations, that sort of thing, do we have a lot of evidence that they're working together in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. We have indictments of a very significant Hell's Angel in British Columbia named Damian Ryan. He's charged for taking something like a $300,000 payment from through an Iranian drug trafficker working for Iranian intelligence, and the tasking of him and his Hell's Angel associate was to target some Iranian community dissident leaders in the United States. And the U.S. government, blocked that, fortunately. But again, it was an Iranian intelligence operation through a Hells Angels operative in British Columbia, which is totally consistent with the networks I've been talking to you about that are involved in fentanyl and etc. There's another huge case of a major community leader in New York City that was targeted by the same, I believe it's the same Iranian intelligence cells that ended up, being the ones that targeted President Donald Trump, or rather targeted him in the weeks before the election that he surprisingly won, over a year ago. So Erwin Kotler, another one, former Liberal Justice Minister, in Montreal, material or driving sort of the reforms to designate certain entities in Iran as terrorist entities, etc. So yeah, there's all kinds of cases. And I'll take it to the next level. If you really want to talk about potential damage, my American government sources, one of them, a former senior DEA person, said there was this carfentanil case in Toronto years ago, around 2018 or something like that, which was essentially, brushed over and covered up by the Trudeau government, who said, oh, no, there's no, there was some Pakistani nationals or immigrants that were involved in a carfentanil lab in Pickering, Ontario, outside Toronto. There was a little rumbling. Could this be a potential weapon of mass destruction type scenario? No one knows if it was that, but the DEA wanted to know, and they have. I have a, I don't have the exact information, but I was told very carefully by my source, Donald Im, that they made connections between this carfentanil lab in Toronto and a very serious entity in Pakistan, right? So that raises, the plausibility that, remember, carfentanil was used by Putin when he went in and counter attacked against, I guess, terror cells. So that could be a potential weapon, something like that. If we're talking about the nexus between the Chinese Communist Party and let's just call them Islamic terror networks, people from the Iranian Guard, Pakistani threat networks, that could be a threat. That's a real conversation in the intelligence community.
Well, yeah, and I think too, it's like when we think about the partnership between organized crime and terrorist groups, we always think about it in terms of like violence, right? But there's also the proceeds of, say, cocaine distribution, fentanyl, illicit narcotics. Those proceeds that are distributed, or the narcotics that are distributed by Khalistani truckers, or the money laundered by IRGC members or people, groups connected to the CCP. The proceeds from that activity oftentimes is going to fund these terror networks, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's U.S. government cases, and this is a little bit of a rabbit hole that's actually very relevant. Again, sources with the DEA back in the 2000s were really digging into how Hezbollah had become one of the most important transnational narcotics and money laundering networks, specifically because the U.S. government had put sanctions on, many legal Iranian government methods for moving money. And so Hezbollah was working with Latin American cartels to move drugs and launder money. Again, this is where people like Ryan Wedding come into the mix, where the Sinaloa cartel, where Colombian cartels are working directly with Hezbollah operatives. And here's the real kicker. There's some brilliant reporting. There's even a documentary now about how the Obama administration basically stopped the DEA and got them to stand down. They had operations going on in Iran, the Middle East, Latin America, North America. They were looking at basically decapitating, Hezbollah in its money laundering and drug operations that went all the way high up into the Iranian government. And the Obama administration, and I guess his staffer, Ben Rhodes, really wanted to get their version of like a detente, or a nuclear sort of deal with Iran to put a lid on it, as they thought. And what happened? That meant the DEA had to back off on these major operations targeting Iranian government people. And so it kind of, and the DEA people they're not political. They're like, we want to get after this because this is how Iran is really hurting us. And they were stopped. So I think that just gets to your question about, how important the criminal networks are for states like Iran to get around sanctions and to hurt us North Americans with criminality and drug trafficking and money laundering.
Well, there was a lot of questionable policy decisions during the Obama administration. I mean, Sam, I don't know if you're aware or if you remember, but there was also the Operation Fast and Furious, that was an ATF operation which moved illegal firearms into Mexico, into the hands of Mexican cartels. The idea was that they were going to trace the weapons to the end user and make some arrests, which never happened. And the only thing that came out of that operation was, well, the reason why the operation became public was because there was a border agent an American border agent who was murdered by an American gun that was sold under the umbrella of the Fast and Furious operation. So there was a lot going on there that was very, very interesting, to say the least. Mm-hmm. So, Sam, while we're on the subject of where we are now, Canada, we are once again in the middle, right? We've put ourselves in a bad spot, which how do we do this, Sam? How okay, let's start there. How does this happen? How do we find, like, as I pointed out in something I wrote earlier this week, I kept saying that Canada found itself between a rock and a hard place, because here we have this strategic partnership or strategic alliance with China. And in the meantime, the United States is going around the world cutting the head off of the snake, right? Now we find ourselves in this situation where our largest historic ally is in Iran, cutting China out of the Middle East, which I agree with you. I think that is the ultimate motivation. Obviously, there's others, resources, that sort of thing. But I think the big motivation is getting China out of the Middle East. And so Canada, on the one hand, expresses support for the strikes.
I was surprised. Yeah,
I was too. I couldn't believe that they released an official statement on it from the PMO. I thought that it was something they would just casually try to ignore. I mean, Sam, what were your thoughts when you read it?
I was just surprised because, one, it's the right position. From my point of view, it's the only position. Even though we know, or anyone that knows anything about Canada currently knows, that Canada doesn't have the military capacity to assist, doesn't have the power really to matter in what it says, right? So it doesn't really matter if Canada is for or against it. So given that, I think I was simply surprised that Carney came out and appeared to say the right thing if you're a defender of the West, right? But you're right. Being the strategic partner of China would be a big tension. If you believe that statement, like what does it even mean? Before that, we had his speech in Davos, which a lot of big journalists and analysts, were all excited about the Carney Doctrine. And I told you, you told me it meant nothing. It was just words, because there's no power behind it. There's no actual leadership of any other middle powers. They know that Canada doesn't have, they can't back up. They can't they can't cash the check that they write. So I
Yeah.
mean, where are we now? Of course, I was surprised Carney took the right position. I was not surprised within 2 days that the foreign minister was saying something different, when obviously, the Liberal Party now, their own party, that is their elected members, have many people that are quite favorable to sort of Islam in the Middle East, quite favorable to regimes like Iran, really, if they're being honest about it. Many Chinese Communist Party interests, as we know. We have people like, I don't even call him senator anymore, Yuan Pao, that uses his office very obviously. As soon as Mark Carney said Canada supports, the U.S. Actions, Yuan Pao cited Mark Carney's words in the Davos speech against him and basically said, "How can you do that? You're now essentially paraphrasing. You're a puppet for the United States, right?" So there's a lot of people in the Liberal Party that are very favorable to China, like Yuan Pao. Now Carney has to please them. Now he has to try to get a deal with, the United States. Otherwise, he's not a dumb person. He knows, as you and I know, and have said probably dozens of times, Canada, without our greatest trading partner and ally, we're not a very going concern. And as I said, Carney's trying to thread the needle between way too many people. And what happens when you try to please everyone and you're not a very powerful person yourself? You do things like you flip-flop. So that's what Carney did with his Iran position. But when I really boil it down, as I say, it doesn't matter what Canada says. 20 years from now, if we follow, the plan that I've been advocating a little bit, let's build up slowly, steadily, recognize who our friends are, start rebuilding our military, we will matter, but we don't matter now. And while you're going around the world flip-flopping and making friends with dictators, you will not matter in 20 years because that's the wrong way to go.
I couldn't agree more. Sam, I was going to ask you, like, what you make of his recent comments. So for people who may not have seen it, Carney put out a statement, PMO put out a statement in support of the strikes on Iran. And then days later, he's in Australia giving a series of interviews and press engagements, saying otherwise, kind of going back on the statement that was made previously.
Yeah, he said, now we regretfully support, because prima facie, on the face of it, it did, break international laws. There was no imminent threat, blah, 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 a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. Canada will not write a blank check. And again, when he says something like that, I say, Canada doesn't have a check to write. Right? No one cares what Canada's... People know that Canada, as it is, under the liberal gaslighting, sort of way of governing, where their voting base thinks Canada matters and has a say in the world, but people that kind of understand the world know that Canada doesn't matter. Whether it's Britain, France, New Zealand, or any kind of smaller ally. Micronesia knows that Canada's military doesn't really matter at this point. Canada is kind of broke, right? So, I mean, it's all a lot of theater. And as I say, when I try to understand, what Mark Carney's doing, he's just trying to stay elected, and interestingly, I mean, I don't even know if I want to go there, but it seems like Pierre Poilievre has started to recalibrate his voice and maybe successfully striking a little bit of a tone with maybe some boomer men who might realize by now that they sort of bought a bill of goods with Mark Carney being the elbows up warrior.
I really sincerely hope so, because stuff like this, look, the thing that I can't figure out about Mark Carney is, like, I'm watching these clips of interviews, and I think I watched one of the full ones from Australia where, like, he talks about meeting with Xi Jinping and, making a good impression. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? And I don't know if he's the thing that confuses me is I don't know if he's playing to his base back home, or if he's or if he's just has zero instinct for geopolitics. I don't, like, Sam, what do you think?
It is confusing. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, I don't think he has figured out who he's talking to, because sometimes he's speaking to Washington and President Trump. We know he wants some sort of deal. Sometimes he's speaking to what I strongly assert is his real power base, which is the China business lobby, in Eastern Canada, which determines who's going to be the liberal leader. Sometimes he's speaking to, his Davos circle. Sometimes he's speaking to Xi Jinping. Sometimes he's speaking to the Canadian electorate and his base. Sometimes he's trying to appeal to that, let's call it the 10 to 15% of boomer men that the Conservative Party believes they can take back and get a minority. So he doesn't know. Like, it reminds me of a great quote when, like, John F. Kennedy was running against Nixon and beat him. He's like, Nixon can't keep his story straight. It's going to be exhausting for him, Whereas John F. Kennedy kind of knew what he was about at that point. So I feel like Mark Carney is starting to be a little bit Nixonian in a way.
Well, this is the difference between, having a set of principles that you firmly believe in and will fight to uphold, versus just being an empty suit and just saying the things that need to be said in order to make the things happen that you need to make happen, right?
Right. And I forgot one entity that will be Brookfield and his investments that are silently sort of in the background looming in some of those decisions, I believe.
So, yeah, because, like, Sam, the thing that confuses me, look, what has happened with Mark Carney and the Liberal Party and just Canada in general from the moment he was elected has confused me from start to finish. I've studied this stuff for most of my life. I can close my eyes and recite the entire history of the Chinese Communist Party from start to finish. Well, not finish because we're still there, but Mao's entire lifespan. Yeah. You know what I mean? I don't understand what he's doing, because I think you're right. I think what he's doing is he's just wearing too many hats, and he doesn't believe in any of it. At the end of the day, all he is he's a finance guy. He's a banker. He's dollars and cents. He wants to make himself and his friends as much money as humanly possible and get out of there. Right. So, but he has to try to fool anybody who's watching that he's on the side of, good and on the side of humanity, which he's not. And Sam, like, just as just broadly speaking, what has the last 6 months looked like to you? Are you as confused as me? Because I have no idea what this guy is doing and why.
I mean, like, when you were, that resonates with me, because I think it applies to much of the Canadian public. And the reason for that, I think, is, like, as you know, I see the whole last election as a psychological operation where everyone was fooled in the fog of war. Everyone was fooled by President Trump's trolling. And to this day, I can't tell you that I don't think one person in Canada truly understands what President Trump was doing with some of that trolling that helped to skew our election. I don't even know if he knows or is in control of his trolling, or if it's, I don't know if, like, there's some behind the scenes deal between Carney and Trump to do with some Brookfield investment. It's a possibility. I've heard people speculate that kind of stuff. Why would, President Trump, being a smart person, appear to toss, like, statements out there to stupefy much of the electorate so that they would choose a party that actually the American government is going to have a problem cooperating with? So that doesn't even seem to benefit President Trump. Yeah. These are all the confusing pieces of the puzzle. It's hard to see. That's why, I can't give you a great answer. But one thing I always come back to is that my understanding of the world since 2020 has been that China is rushing towards war, and Russia and Iran are part of that, right? And the American government at the deep state level, and I'm not talking about deep state in a conspiracy way, I'm talking about the US military and intelligence apparatus, which, as you and I agree, underwrites the American empire. It is a very, in some ways, I think the most powerful entity in the world. And it, let's just call it recognizes that China was prepared to go by 2027. So it wouldn't matter if President Trump, President Biden with his following acuity, Kamala Harris, or anyone was president. The most powerful entity in the world, which is that military structure and the business community at the end of the day of the United States and the American people, were going in a certain direction. And President Trump is sort of he's a major part of it, but at the end of the day, America is going in that direction, and that is getting very, very real about showing China that no, you're not taking over.
So, Sam, this is the best analysis that I can provide, and I want to share it with you and see what you think of it. Don't worry, we're not going down any dark rabbit holes here. Just based on my own reading and conversations that I've had with very, very intelligent people, far more intelligent than myself, what it appears is that what we're watching play out is a conflict between two groups, really. The America First group, which is not America First in the sense that most people think. It's maintaining America as the global hegemon, right? So it's America First on a global scale versus the New World Order globalists, which, Mark Carney's recent speech where he talks about the international rules-based order and being, that being ruptured and a need for a new order. What he's really alluding to is shifting the balance of power from the United States to China. That's what this New World Order really is, right? The New World Order is a euphemism for a new China-led world. Right. And that seems to be the conflict, the ongoing conflict, is that you have these two groups, one led by Trump in the United States with Israel and a bunch of other nations like Hungary involved in it. And then you have this other group, which appears to be a lot of the middle powers with the banking sector and the technocrats involved. Sam, do you see that as being, a viable analysis?
Yeah, I think that's pretty clarifying. And I think, the other speech at Davos, Marco Rubio's, where, he said, America is really not trying to dominate Europe or other people. America is the son and daughter of Europe and, will not accept the managed decline. And what he meant by that is pointing exactly to what you're saying. The Davos Circle, the Dominic Bartons, the Mark Carneys, the Lord Peter Mandelsons, the Jeffrey Epsteins, etc., the Jin Lee Kuns of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, those people that, they had decided that global elites are going to profit while softly managing the decline of America. So whatever, if you want to call it, traditional democracy, Judeo-Christian based, etc., all those values, they were going to be, no, it won't matter. We can have a Chinese Communist Party global order, and all the rich, business people around the world are going to be part of it and benefit. Yeah. And where I think and that where the kind of Davos ideology came into it is everyone else will accept that, and they'll accept that their standard of living is going to decline. They don't need a home anymore. They can have, a very nice rental place, blah, blah, blah. That's where all the social values that I haven't focused on as part of this very much, but does fit into it. And I think you're asking me, do you see it? Yeah, that's a pretty clear way to see it. And I think that Rubio's speech captured it, saying that, no, there are people, let's just call it an enduring power center of the West that believes that, better or worse, democracy and Judeo-Christian values should be, the North Star of the world. And they're not shy of saying that, and what do you know? I agree with that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. Like, what's for me, Sam, it's been a really, it's been a period of growth for me because historically I was very much against regime change wars. I was very much against, I was very, very opposed to the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I still am. But with this conflict in Iran, what I'm starting to see is the other side of the argument. That, like, look, the world is going to have a superpower. There's going to be a hegemon one way or the other. Somebody's going to be in control. And if it's not America, then it's going to be China. And do you really want a communist nation that has roughly anywhere from 500,000 to 1.8 million people currently in internment camps, suffering torture in what they call black rooms, to be in control of the world? No, I don't. Like, if it comes down to it and the world needs a superpower, there is no better empire than the American empire.
Yeah, and there's ways to do it. I mean, whether President Trump is the one to marshal this through or not, I mean, I do think, back to Iran, that it could be a different scenario where in the Bush era, it was all about, advertisers and study groups saying, okay, Iraqi people, this is why democracy is better. We're going to workshop it with you and you're going to become democratic. And that didn't work very well.
Yeah.
But now in Iran, actually, there is a tremendous tradition of one of the deepest civilizations in the world that is not necessarily, Muslim based. There's many different ethnicities there. There are different native sort of traditions there. Mm-hmm. And there's a people that are hungry for democracy. So I wouldn't look at it idealistically or hopefully, but I do think there could be the different conditions on the ground, that, my colleagues, like Nagar Mojtahedi, people in the Iranian Canadian Persian community do believe that the society in Iran has been hungry for this. And if the conditions can be created, there could be a democracy there, a natural democracy. It's possible, and I really don't know how the war planners and CIA have looked at this. I would assume, all I know is they don't want Americans on the ground in any enduring way, or even in probably beyond a special forces capacity in the near future.
Well, okay, so here's a few things that have impressed me about this. First is exactly what you said. There's no boots on the ground. And from what I've read, Trump doesn't plan to put boots on the ground anywhere. It's airstrikes, air and sea. That's where the focus is. Go in, surgical, get the people you need to get out of there. The other thing that I like, or what I've heard and read, I mean, we'll see what happens, what actually takes place. But from what I've read, the idea is we're going in, we're getting out this toxic, poisonous terrorist regime, and then we're going to let the Iranians decide what they want to do. You want to bring back the Shah, whatever Iranians want is what they will get. Of course, now I'm not naive enough to believe that the United States is just going to leave there without a government that's friendly with the US. But instead of just installing a puppet government for the United States like they did in Iraq, right, and attempted in Afghanistan, ultimately failed and handed the keys back over to the Taliban under Biden. But the idea that, okay, look, we're not going to impose our way of life on these people. We're going to remove this tumor, and then we're going to let them figure it out on their own. We'll give some assistance, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, make sure it's a friendly government. But otherwise, we're going to let the people of Iran decide. That's, from what I've read, that's the ambition.
I do honestly think that's their hope. And it's like, you can't just hope and walk away. If you're America, of course, you and Israel will obviously have a say in it. You want to make sure that the bullies or some of the people lurking in the background to be, maybe the less bad option. Of course, there's going to be bad people trying to take over, but I think it's not going to be the same as Venezuela, but they, you know, they want to be in and out for sure, and they want to have their eyes on Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific. I would say within months.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
that actually brings me, Sam, to the next question, because so what we have here is we have the United States decapitating China around the world. I don't think it's any coincidence that U.S. Special Forces assisted the Mexican military in taking down El Mencho. I think that is something that the United States is actively working on in Mexico, disrupt the cartels, because the cartels really are the acting government in Mexico, right? So disrupt the cartels, take them down from the top. Ryan Wedding, as you spoke about earlier, he wasn't taken down by Canadian law enforcement, although he is Canadian. He was taken down by the Americans. So, Sam, do you want to add something there? Do you have something to say there?
There's no question. You're right. While the eyes of the world are on Iran, very soon they could be on Cuba, other areas of South America. So, and that will be, again, cutting the legs off, if not decapitating, cutting the legs off of China's efforts of the past few decades to take over ports in the Western Hemisphere. So yeah, that's a big part of it. Absolutely. And that will bring us back to what you've asked me a few times previously about then what's going to happen in the Arctic and what's going to happen with some of the bad people in Canada. So yeah, there's a major operation going on. You don't have to stretch your legs too much to see this as, in some ways, a different version of a global war scenario. I hate to call it that, but there's credible people that do look at it that way.
Well, here's what I think. And this is where I get really excited, because this is where all of my 30 years of reading and studying this stuff comes into play. Here's what I think. And Sam, tell me what you think, okay? And don't worry, I'll let you go soon. I know you want to go to bed. You got a million stories to write tomorrow. Here's what I think. I think we are watching a global war, but I think the war that we're watching unfold is fought differently because China is not an offensive. They don't fight offensively. Their entire military is built defensively, built to defend China, right? Mm-hmm. This is why they can't even make it across the channel to Taiwan to invade. They don't have the capacity for it. For people who, Taiwan in comparison to China in terms of landmass, it's a speck of dust. And they can't even get across the channel to invade. And it's because China has never invested in an offensive military. Everything is defensive. And it has been historically. It's the way that they've always operated. The Great Wall of China is a great example, mm-hmm. right? Whereas the United States is a global offensive military. They do have defensive capabilities, but they're offensive, right? And so what we're watching are these two nations at war right now, and China typically operates through subversion and espionage because they don't have a strong offensive military. They don't have the capacity to go kinetic even with Taiwan, let alone the United States. Mm-hmm. So what we're watching is the United States flexing its muscle and using the strength that it has to defeat China in its weakest zone.
Absolutely. I agree with all of that. And, as you know, that I believe Canada being saturated with that hybrid warfare, that subversion, whenever this episode comes out, the news will have broken a few days ago of another major spy case in Britain where the husband of a Labour MP was one of three people arrested on charges of allegedly helping Chinese intelligence. This man, husband of a Labour MP in Keir Starmer's government, is in an entity called Asia House, which promotes trade between UK and China, chaired by none other than Dominic Barton, the former ambassador for Canada to China, former, head, big boss with the World Economic Forum, big boss with the Canada-China Business Council, very tight with Jin LeCun, who we've talked about before with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So yeah, China fights by subverting financial, academic, political elites in the West around the world. And they've gotten very deep into Britain's system, even deeper into Canada's system. And, it's somewhat encouraging to me that even though Keir Starmer's government is just as weak as Mark Carney's, it looks like British intelligence and counterintelligence still has some fight left in them, because they're, even after getting blocked on another major case we've talked about, two younger people targeting conservative Tory MPs, and sending intelligence back to China, rather. That case canceled by Keir Starmer. Now we have British intelligence, with another slamming case. So they're not going away. This is one thing that gives me hope. I know that there's people in Canadian intelligence and military that are very, very believe a great deal in, the West, the leader of the West, and what I've talked about, military, business, intelligence, led by the United States worldwide, is the most powerful force in the world, I believe.
Yeah. And what's interesting, Sam? Well, okay, before we go there, I want to ask you, what is holding this Labour government together in Britain? I mean, what is just based on this alone, right? Just based on the fact that you have a Labour MP's husband who is engaged in espionage on behalf of China, that should dissolve their sitting government, because it is a Labour government, should it not?
Yeah, the story's just breaking, but look, they've got Lord Peter Mandelson also under criminal investigation for Epstein ties. And as I say, the China business tie, again, is huge. It looks like this husband of a Labour MP, exact same networks associated to Dominic Barton and others that we've talked about. Doesn't mean that Dominic Barton did anything illegal. What it means is that the Labour government of Keir Starmer has multi crises, multi scandals, all involving China, I say. And so, yeah, within days, maybe his own party may turn on him, and that government could dissolve, as it seems that, almost every prior British government, the prime minister is stepping down within, years, months, or et cetera. And that could happen to Keir Starmer very quickly.
It has to, because okay, so here's what I see playing out. And Sam, we're going to get to the closing subject here. The United States currently is ping-ponging around, right? Venezuela, Iran, more than likely Cuba next, and that'll be a quick one. That'll be in and out, right? Greenland, of course, they're going to come over to the Canadian Arctic. Now, what happens with Canada, I've gone back and forth on this, but as it looks right now, especially seeing how spineless and tentative Mark Carney seems to be on all of this, that whatever deal is made between Canada and the United States, it'll be done diplomatically. Do you see kind of a similar scenario playing out there?
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree. I mean, even Scott Bessent said it a few weeks ago while Washington was still very angry with Carney's speech. I think he said, we don't know what the heck he's doing. He doesn't know what he's doing, but we'll get there. It won't be a straight line. So yeah, I mean, I guess if you're a Canadian with a realistic sense of the world, that's good news. I mean, I don't know how that affects Mark Carney and his own party. I think that those are the needles that he's trying to thread. Maybe he has to lose face and come out and say, I was a little bit wrong with China. There's, I don't know, but I guess I really do. I think you're right in that. I mean, he can't be that stupid to know that, you can't not get a deal with the US. Even, Japan has come out recently and said they're not interested in doing vehicle trade or investing in their vehicle interests in Canada unless Canada has that good trade deal with the US, which is just common sense, right? And so again, Pierre Poilievre seems to, as much as most of the Canadian media doesn't want to see it, he seems to be gaining his step a little bit which will put more pressure on Mark Carney to make a deal. So yeah, if I had to roll a dice or flip a coin, I think there's a better than 50% chance that Canada does get a deal within a year. If we don't, things will have gone down very quickly.
Well, and Sam, you point out a very good point here, right? Like Toyota and Honda are not interested in selling 10,000 cars to Canadians. They're interested in selling 30 million to Americans.
Yeah.
Like that's but you made a very good point, because this is the economic consequence. It's not just the domestic economy, right? We're talking about our other trade partners who now realize that we're not going to be trading with the United States at the capacity that we used to. So they're like, why would we manufacture our cars in your country? Like, it's going to cost us more to manufacture the vehicles than the profit we're going to make off the sale of those vehicles. We manufacture cars in Canada because we want to sell them in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, common sense, right?
Yeah.
Common sense ain't common.
Okay. So Sam, before I burn you out here, and I'm sure you have another story to write tonight before it's all over. So.
Before midnight. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have the United States right now. They're currently in Iran. I'm hearing rumblings from people that I know with insider info that we could see the United States touch down in Cuba as early as March. So this month.
Yeah.
And then, you have this deal with Greenland. I'm still unclear as to where that deal is, but it does look like some form of defensive agreement. Basically, they're like, just let us be Greenland, but you guys can come here and do everything, do all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be some form of intervention in Canada with the United States. What I estimate at this point in time is that they're going to somehow force an election, because they need Mark Carney and the Liberal Party out of there. These people are clearly incompetent. Now, I don't know what their preferential government in Canada is in order to get some form of deal done, but I think that's where we're heading. Now, you have all of this action happening in the Middle East, the Caribbean, the Arctic, and you have Taiwan that's sitting there exposed, and China that is pledged to invade before 2027. With the United States occupied in all other parts of the world, how dangerous is this for Taiwan, Sam?
Yeah, I don't get a sense of danger for a couple of reasons. The main one being that a big one being what we've talked about. Xi Jinping's purged everyone that could enact.
That's true. That's right. That's
so
right.
He would have to replace most of the PLAs. As crazy as this sounds, he has to find new PLA leaders to even be in position to invade Taiwan within the next year or two. And I don't even think that's feasible. And what else are they seeing in Iran? America has sunk a naval vessel with a torpedo for the first time since 1945. Yeah. They have sent B-2s on long-range missions. They're showing what they could do, and very clearly, in my own talks over the past 2 years, I knew both from Taiwan, that is people high in the government and people high in the American military, that they have really, especially on the American side, they're not afraid of what China can do there. They're afraid that China will make the wrong decision and it'll cause a lot of death, but they have no fear that China would win that. I'm saying this from the American military side, whether they're right or wrong, but what I heard in some briefings, I was very convinced. And how can I disagree with what we see in Venezuela and Iran? Yeah. I would add to that, there was another in that story that I talked about, where the New York Times, revealed that the CIA director in 2023 told Apple and NVIDIA, all the bosses, that be ready by 2027 because Xi's positioning himself. There's a little line in that story about, a conversation between Trump and Xi, and the reporter said how they got this detail. Trump was bothered because whenever he talked about Taiwan with Xi started breathing heavily over the phone. So it's showing me that people wonder, how much Trump or the U.S. would come to Taiwan's defense, and I've never had that concern. I know that at a deep level, they're preparing for this, and they're taking the steps to make sure that China can't do it. She's the one that is probably deep down starting to realize that what he's pitched to the hardliners and the whole nation, that China will have Taiwan, peacefully or not, by within a few years. I think he's starting to realize that America won't let that happen. And I think that America is in a very calculated way. They're not going to have too many. It's not going to take too much air power or naval power to do what they're going to do in Latin America, whether it's Cuba or beyond. Canada, as you say, and I agree, will be diplomatic. That's going to be very interesting politically. Greenland, I don't think that's going to be a big deal. Russia is the big wild card. I think we haven't talked about it. That's another conversation, but something interesting. There's some Russian hardliners, and I won't even mention the guy's name because I want to amplify it, but he's been very influential with the MAGA base, confusing, Trump's base in a lot of ways about Ukraine. And he said, look what's happening. When Iran goes down, we're next, meaning Russia is next. So I don't know. That's the big wild card in there. What's going on in Putin's mind? We've already got some indication what's going on in Xi's mind with his heavy breathing over Taiwan. Yeah, I mean, I think we both agree in some way or another, there is a global conflict going on.
Well, Sam, I want to put this to you because I've read a few. I know the gentleman you're talking about, and we won't say his name here. But so Sam, you know this. Historically, China's relationship with Russia has always been strained at best.
Yeah.
At best. Worst case scenario, they're at war with each other over territory, right? Yeah. So I don't think Russia has ever wanted to be allied with China. I think Russia has always seen itself as being a friend of the United States, even during the Cold War. A lot of what they did was reactionary. And this isn't I'm not a Russia sympathizer. Trust me, Putin is a bloodthirsty, he's as dangerous as anyone, right? But I think Russia's ultimate ambition is to be allied with the United States. They've made numerous attempts over the years, right? And that since the Second World War, the United States and Russia have always kind of had this weird relationship where they're pointing nukes at each other, but they are very similar in their perspective and share common goals. So what I wrote today was that strangely, with this America First group, there appears to be a space opening for Russia in there, and that it could be a very positive thing to see Russia separate from China and not join NATO, but become more friendly with the allied nations. Do you see a scenario like that ever happening, Sam?
Yeah, for me, I can see a path there, but I'm almost the way that you're feeling confused about Canada's politics. For me, it's hard to see that sorted out because I know about the oligarchical gangster system in Russia. That's the part that I don't see meshing with the US. But in some ways, there are value alignments in religion in some certain areas. You never know. You never say never. But I'm finding it hard to see that path.
Well, also too, just trade economic ambitions, right? I mean, a lot of Russia's exports are very similar to Canada and the United States, right? We have a lot of the same stuff. We're geographically, Canada and Russia are geographically kind of in the same northern hemisphere part of the world, right? So I'm as confused as you, and I think we're all confused right now. And this probably for people listening was a very confusing podcast because we're just trying to untangle what's happening, but some of it makes sense and a lot of it doesn't. But I think this is going to be a very pivotal year for the world on all fronts, on the tech front, war, culturally. It's everything is going to change this year. And hopefully, Sam, the whole world doesn't burn down before the next time you and I come back together, because it's been a little too long this time, I think.
It doesn't burn down, or I don't burn out.
Oh, dude, every day.
Everything is in play this year. Everything is in play.
Bro, every morning I wake up, I pour an extra large cup of coffee before I open my Gmail, because I'm getting 3 times the amount of bureau reports than I normally do. So with that said, I'll let you off the hook, brother. I'll let you get some rest, or write another story before you get some rest. Right. Before you go, Sam, tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, go to thebureau.news. You can find me at Scooper Cooper on X, but mainly thebureau.news. 35,000 subscribers now. I want to get that up to 40,000 and keep pushing. And of course, more paid subscribers so I can pay those bills, pay those lawyers, etc.
Dude, listen, guys, I say this every single time. Sign up at thebureau.news, but don't just sign up for free. Sign up as a paid subscriber. If you want Sam to continue doing the reporting that he does, which is balls to the wall, burn the boats, we're never going back, Sam Cooper, you just put up your couple bucks a month. Sam is completely reader funded. He does not have any outside support, no sponsors, no nothing. Sam is completely reader supported. So sign up at thebureau.news. Every single morning, I go through my Gmail, and the first thing I do is I read the Bureau, and the Bureau informs me on a lot of what is happening in the world. Because like I said at the beginning of this episode, guys, Sam is one of the very few people that is completely nonpartisan. He doesn't have an agenda. He prints things that contradict what he said to me on this podcast before, because what he thought was going to happen didn't happen, but he doesn't just ignore it and pretend it didn't happen. He actually prints it. And that's why Sam Cooper is important. Sam Cooper is a real journalist. Sign up at thebureau.news. Follow him on X at Scooper Cooper. I am a habitual refresher of his feed. And if you follow Sam, you will be too. Sam, I'm heading out of the country soon. I'm going to be back with a nice, beautiful bronze tan. You down to do this again when I get back?
Yeah, just don't go to Cuba.